I'm Jim Bolen. Thank you for that introduction, and I really appreciate it. I came to be here today because I had the opportunity to speak at Coffee with Council, which is a program with 17 Strong and Hamilton City Council, and had the opportunity to talk and discuss general preparedness stuff. And I had that opportunity because I had the opportunity to work with Brandon Sarber and City of Hamilton as we worked through the COVID-19 pandemic and the response to that, working with the fire department, police department, the fairgrounds, county elected officials, local elected officials, and really made some great relationships out of that, and just kind of came about as me bumping into him at the street one day and saying, hey, what do you do for public outreach? Because I want to get out there, I want to tell the message. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jim Bolen. I'm the director of the Butler County Emergency Management Agency. I've been with the agency, I've been in emergency management about a decade. I joined the agency here in Butler County in 2016. Prior to that, spent 3 years in Warren County. Started off in emergency management here in Butler County as an intern. I've had the opportunity to work on a lot of events and a lot of special responses as it relates to, like I said, COVID-19, but also train derailments and hurricanes and flooding and about everything. And so I've had the opportunity to do a lot, and I'm really thankful. I tell folks, I got the best job in the county. I get to work with citizens. I get to work with our elected officials. I get to work with our first responders in the communities, all great populations, and I get to help people in their time of need, right? That's why I do what I do. And people ask, what is emergency management? And I heard somebody say something, and emergency management is theft, so I'm gonna steal it and I'm gonna tell it to you. And what they said was, I'm an emergency manager. I'm like a wedding planner. But instead of planning your wedding, I plan the worst day of your life. And that's what we do, right? That's what we do. We put plans in place so that when that worst day of your life happens, that we have an ability and capability to respond to it, right? And we work with our local elected officials. We work with our county elected officials, state elected officials, federal elected officials. We work with our first responders, and we work with our communities to make sure that they are safe during disasters. There's not a better job than that in the world. So I'm very lucky, and I'm very happy and blessed to be here with you guys. I want to talk to you today about a concept called the whole community. And what is this idea of a whole community? Well, this is an approach that FEMA kind of put together several years ago. And it says that we're not just a dot on a map. When we talk about the community, we're not numbers on a page or dots on a map. We are a collection of industry. We're a collection of citizens. We're a collection of government. And all of those folks come in together, and we bring out the product, what we call that whole community. Our emergency management agency adopts this whole community approach. My job is not to be here for the elected officials only. It's not to be here for the first responders only. It's not to be here for the citizens only. It's to be here for the whole community. And we'll talk about why that's important as we move along. But it's really predicated on this idea. What we're talking about is interconnection. When we talk about interconnection, realize that we have industry, we have citizens, we have governments, and people work in that community, and there's a lot of interactions within those groups. So when we talk about a citizen going about their, everybody in here is a citizen of the community, right? But you may also be a business owner. You may also be an elected official. And so some way, your life is always interacting with this. What's an example? You go to work. What do you do in the morning? You stop and get your coffee, right? You stop and get your coffee at the Big B Coffee right there on 129. You get your coffee and then you go to work where you are an employee. And then you go out to another business and you get a sandwich for lunch. And then you stop by the post office and you mail a letter to your niece, right? That's an interconnection between all of these components, and it shows how we are interconnected throughout the day. The other side of this is there's a whole global discussion about whole community, right? Because not only did you stop at the post office, that's not your only interaction with government. What's your interaction with government on a daily basis? If you're a business owner, do you hope that the economy has full faith and credit in the United States ability to pay its debts? Yeah. If you're a business owner, do you want to know that your roads are going to be cleaned and that people can actually get to your business to spend money? Yeah, so it's this cascading, this big jump, this big collection of whole community. But let's go smaller. When we look at that, now we have interconnection within these components, right? And so we have citizens who are citizens, the smallest population unit that we have in our community. But what are citizens a part of? They're a part of faith communities. They're a part of community groups, right? And they come to these groups and they do things to support their community, to support local businesses, to support government, to support other community members. And so when we look at this globally now, we're zooming back out. Instead of seeing these little triangles, what we get is this rich tapestry, right? It's not just government, industry, and citizens. It's government, industry, citizens, government, industry, citizens, government, industry, citizens. And in this case, in this opportunity, we have the ability to respond to natural disasters and to respond to things in our community in a way that allows us to be more effective and more efficient, right? So let's talk about how disasters affect our community. This is a map. This is my favorite map in emergency management. This is Katrina's diaspora, or diaspora. 4 years of Bible college and I still can't pronounce it. Katrina's diaspora, Katrina's diaspora. What does that mean? What's diaspora? Dispersion. Every dot on that map is a location where a resident affected by Hurricane Katrina moved. I'll go to a bigger map and show you that later. But let's frame our discussion with that, right? What happens when we have a disaster? Well, we have a loss of economic resources. If you're a business owner and your business gets damaged by a storm, what happens to your business? 25% of all businesses that are impacted by a disaster will close within 2 years. 25%. There's a lot of different numbers out there. A lot of them are not baseless, but FEMA stands by this one, 25% of businesses. And we'll talk about what that does to our community as we get further along. We also have environmental impact. This is a beautiful facility, by the way. I've never been here before. Phenomenal facility. Not what I was expecting, but it's absolutely beautiful. But it's overlooking the Great Miami River. Is that an important asset for the city of Hamilton? Is that an important asset for Butler County? Is that an important asset for Ohio? Yeah. And what's underneath that river? The Great Miami Aquifer, where we get the world's best water, right? And so if we were to have an East Palestine event, if we were to have some sort of illegal dumping, if we were to have some accidental release of chemicals, what does that do to our natural resources that we have out here? What ability do we have to respond to that? It's a great question, right? And then we have the loss of community, and this goes back to this map, right? This is why I think this map is important. And here's it a little bit larger. It's not much larger, but it's the best I can do, guys. There's your map. What do you notice about those folks? Do you think that those folks that moved from New Orleans up to Detroit are ever going to go back to New Orleans? No, probably not. What about this one person that went to the very top of Alaska? That's brave, right? That's brave. When this event happens, it shredded and ripped communities apart. It shredded and it ripped communities apart. How does it do that? How do disasters do that? Well, let's look at it. In grad school, one of the things that we did that I thought was the most beneficial thing I've ever done at any level of education that I've ever had and ever done, and every course I've ever taken and every course I've ever taught, is these cascading disaster sequences, right? And that's what we have right here. It only goes 3 deep, but that's okay for the purposes that we have right now. So what does this tell us? In the event that we have a hazard, what happens because of that hazard? Well, we have closed businesses. We have homes that are destroyed. Well, what happens when a business closes? We lack resources in our community, right? What happens to the people who are employed by the business? They don't have a job, right? What about homes that get destroyed? What happens to those folks? Right? It's a great question. And we can take this down and down and down and go as granular as you want to go to it. And I had to. In grad school, we drove it down 7 levels. And when you get that low in a disaster, your consequence is milk spoils, right? And that's funny, right? You know, it's funny. But then you start thinking about spoiled milk. And I'm blessed. I don't have to worry about a gallon of milk. But if I was a single mother below the poverty line, living off of supplemental nutrition, yeah, I am worried about that. And it's not just that I can't get milk, right? Because SNAP has good programs in place. We'll get funding back to those folks and they can go to the grocery store and they can get some. Oh, but wait, what's in their community? A destroyed grocery store. Now these folks lack transportation. They're already below that poverty line. They're already in need of assistance. And we've just pushed that consequence out further for them. So now it's 2 hours to get milk instead of 1 hour, right? It's 2 hours to get milk instead of 1 hour. Still, maybe that's not a big deal, but that's a big deal to that person. That's a barrier that's been put in place to make sure that them and their child is safe, right? That's a terrible thing. It's an absolutely terrible thing. So how can we fix this? What can we do to fix this? Well, one of the things is we need to understand that impacts in one area of the community can have outsized impacts on others. So a tornado coming through in Hamilton can affect Middletown, can affect Monroe, can affect Westchester, can affect Liberty, right? These effects are far ranging. This is the butterfly flaps its wings on one continent and we have a tsunami on the other. This is what we're talking about. This is the practical application of that. But that presents us with an opportunity. And that opportunity is the earlier that we close off that loop, we impact the downstream impacts of that, right? So if the businesses don't close, then we don't have the lack of resources and we don't have the loss of jobs. And so now we're dealing with a different situation, right? Because this person who's been through a tornado, who lost their job and lost their home, is less likely to stick around than someone who has a job and doesn't have a home. Or someone who has a home but hasn't lost a job or has lost a job, right? We can work, a lot of times we're able to accept a little bit of an assault when it comes to our lives. But when it gets pushed over the top, that's when people leave and that's when communities break down, right? And so if we can stop this, we can stop that business from closing, we open up a whole new avenue for recovery for our communities, right? And when we talk about this, we're talking about a term, I want to throw it out. It's a nebulous term, it's called resilience, right? Resilient communities, resilience, and I'll use it a couple of times through here. There's no definition of resilient that exists across all spectrums, right? It's a limited, focused area. But essentially what it means is the ability to take an assault and bounce back. We would talk about this as like recovery, in the past. That resiliency is a component of recovery. How fast can Hamilton be back up and running if we had a disaster, right? How fast can Butler County bounce back if we were to have a disaster? That's what we're talking about right here. And so when we talk about that, I want to talk to you about the importance of community in disasters. Because so far we've talked about ripping communities apart. But now let's talk about the role that community can play in our disaster relief, right? This idea that I'm talking about, this whole community approach, is predicated on one thing, right? Government alone can't do it. We all have a responsibility to take preparedness seriously. We all have a responsibility to take preparedness seriously. That's government, that's businesses, that's individuals, that's schools, that's nonprofits, that's all of those folks. Every bit, if you're a part of our community, you have a responsibility to prepare, right? We'll talk about what that means practically. Also realize government can't do it alone because there's gaps that exist. Let's talk about Mrs. Johnson. The tree falls down over her driveway, falls over the road. The government comes through and it cuts it off the road, but they can't step onto her property. But who can? Her neighbors, her NGOs that she works with, the Red Cross, Southern Baptist Disaster Relief, Team Rubicon, all these non-governmental organizations that we work with. Who else can help? Her neighbors, right? John with the chainsaw can come in and help her get out. But let's take that down that cascading route that we're talking about, right? It's a big deal. What's the big deal? It's a tree going across the driveway. Well, if Miss Johnson's 98 years old and that storm came, or that tree went down during a storm, and there's a power outage, right? And Miss Johnson's on insulin, and her insulin needs to be kept cold, and now she's lost power for a significant period of time. Can she get outside and clear that tree? No. First off, no, that's not gonna happen. But what else, right? Does she have the community person that she can go to and say, John, I need help, Here's my challenges. This is what I have, right? If she doesn't have that person, now she has insulin that's gone bad. She's been without power for a while. These consequences start to compound. And that's how we get these deaths of despair. And these are the stories that you hear about these elderly folks. When we have these high heat indexes like we had last week, they roll through, they don't have insurance, they're already not good at thermoregulation, they're already not very good at understanding temperature and feeling temperature, and their homes get into the 90 degrees and we find them dead 3 days after the event. Right? That's how this stuff happens, because we have a lack of community. There's also another element to this, right? Community groups are the first ones to know who's affected, right? We talked, you guys had in your pre-meeting, you talked about people getting better and people who unfortunately have passed away, right? You guys are some of the first to know about that because you're in community with those individuals. If this is your home and your neighbor's house has a tree fall over it, that's not just, hey, there's a house down or a tree down on Elm. That's there's a trees down on Jerry's house. Let's go help, right? And so these community groups and these communities are more apt to help and know when there's a need for help because they're in those communities and they exist in those communities. They also help reduce those downstream impacts that we talked about. And there's also another thing about being in a community. It improves your physical and mental health, and it reduces those deaths of despair. We talked about deaths of despair being somebody who's an elderly person in a heat wave, right? Well, what else are deaths of despair? Alcoholism, drug overdoses, suicides. Being in community has a profound effect on that. Those diseases are diseases of disconnection. They're not connected to people. They don't have communities that they can rely on, and they find themselves in a bad spot, right? That's how we do this with community, right? That's one of the benefits of it. And what does that look like practically? Well, it looks like community-driven relief. When we're talking about community-driven relief, we're talking about food pantries. How many food pantries are there in Hamilton?
3.
No? There's hundreds. There's hundreds of food pantries. There's 3 that we know of and 3 that operate and exist as a food pantry. But you know what that misses? And I promise I'm not picking on you. But you know what that misses? That misses those people in their communities who see a need and feed a kid. Those grandmas who look out and see hungry kids of their neighbors, and they say, hey, you know what? I got peanut butter and I got jelly, and we'll make a sandwich, and we'll make sure these kids get food. We can't count the number of food pantries in the county because we can't count the number of meatballs handing out PB&Js, right? That's what's great about our community, right? They see a need and they fill that need. It's also sharing space. We had high heat indices last week. You guys probably seen an email or a message that goes out and said, hey, we have cooling centers. Go to your local libraries. Go to the New Life Mission in Hamilton. Those are our cooling centers, right? It's places where you can go and you can sit and you can, no questions asked, just get out of the heat. And that's incredibly important for our communities. But it ain't comfortable, right? Anything I'm doing is to keep you safe and keep you alive. But your neighbor inviting you into their air-conditioned house, that helps keep you comfortable, right? And so we see those in extreme temperatures. We see people sharing space. We see temporary housing and shelters. We had a tornado that rolled through my hometown, Madison Township. And one of the trustees was the one who opened up his house to the person who lost their house in the disaster, right? That's awesome. That's community. We also see light repair work, childcare. We see shared resources. Here, I have a hammer. Can I borrow your saw? Those types of things. And at the bottom one, often overlooked, emotional and spiritual support, right? Just having somebody to talk to, somebody to think through on one of the worst days of your life. How can we get better? But there's challenges to this that we face. The challenge is we have declining participation in social and community groups. We know it. It's been going around for a thing. We have declining participation in those. We also have limited social capital. We're busier now than we've ever been. We have limited time and attention. And we live lives that are disconnected. It's just the nature of what we're dealing with. So those are challenges. How do we build more resilient communities? We build more resilient communities by building more resilient citizens. We do it by building more resilient industry, and we do it by building more resilient government. That's what we do, because those are the elements that we have to work with. If we make them more resilient, we're more resilient as a community. Importance of family and personal preparedness. I'm going to talk personal preparedness because I'm an emergency manager and it's what we do, right? We always do that. So it helps keep you safe, right? You're less anxious about disasters. You're more likely to recover better if you're prepared. And you can't help others in a disaster if you need help yourself, right? If your house is damaged, you're fixing your house before you're helping your neighbors, right? And so that's the benefits of personal and family preparedness. So here's the plan. This is how we make ourselves more resilient. We make a plan. We build a kit, and we stay informed. So what does make a plan mean? Well, it means making a plan for your home, making a plan for your office, and anywhere else where you spend time. Do you have a camper? Do you have a lake house? Do you have another residence that you stay at? Do you have a plan in place for those areas? Also, does the plan include everyone in your family? Do you have somebody that has access and functional needs? An elderly person who you're expecting them to jump out of a window during a fire? It's probably not going to happen, right? So our plan needs to meet our folks where they are. We also want to make sure our entire family knows what to do. This isn't just yourself and your spouse, your partner. This is yourself, your spouse, your partner, your grandparents, your babysitters, your kids, everybody who comes into your house. Hey, this is how we get out of a disaster, right? In the event of a tornado, this is where we go. In the event of a fire, this is where we meet. Here's where all the emergency numbers are. Pretty straightforward stuff. I'll also tell you, the next one is build a kit, and ready.gov is where you need to go to find the list. I don't put an exhaustive list because it does change over time. But ready.gov has this list, and you can go there and it'll tell you what to put in your home disaster kit. But you definitely need to include food, water, medications, flashlights, all that stuff. And you need to make sure that you have enough for everyone in your family, including your pets. You need to make sure that you have enough food and water for everybody, enough food for your pets, enough water for your pets, all that stuff. And you want to make sure you keep your important documents in a safe location, right? That's how we build a kit. I want to put a disclaimer out there. If you go Google, build a home disaster kit, you're going to get a bunch of people trying to sell you stuff. Some of those are really good, and some of those are really bad. Go to ready.gov, get the list, go to Home Depot, go to Lowe's, go to Walmart, grab a bucket, and just start putting stuff in there that's on that list. You can build that kit out for pennies on the dollar for what you would pay a commercial kit. So I always recommend people check out ready.gov. And then be informed, right? So being informed means knowing what's going on in your community, being able to receive alerts. You guys have probably seen, you've probably received the Amber Alerts, right, for somebody missing. You may also hear of WIA and IPALS. WIA, Wireless Emergency Alerts. IPALS, Integrated Public Alert and Warning System. These are location-specific messaging that we can send out. In the event that there is a hazardous materials release, I can go in on a computer, look at a map, draw a circle around it, and every cell tower that is in that circle will get a message. And every phone that attaches to that cell tower will get that message. And so if you drive into a place 3 hours after I send the alert, if it's still active, it will hit your phone and tell you to leave the area because of whatever, a hazardous materials release, a disaster, whatever the case may be. And we can put those out in the event of an emergency. But guess what? You can opt out of those. So if you've opted out of Amber Alerts and stuff like that, you may have opted out of this as well. I know it's hard getting woke up in the middle of the night by that screaming Amber Alert sound. But I tell you, if you're in the middle of a disaster and that's what's going to save your life, it's worth it to get woken up a couple times. Also want to say use trusted apps. So if you have a weather, we don't have a weather app that we prefer. If you have a weather station that you watch and you trust, you think they get it right, download their app. They always have some mechanism for weather alerting. But I also want to talk about this. This is probably the most important thing that you can do, and that is get a NOAA-approved weather radio. This is a Midland brand. I'm not advocating Midland brands. All that you need to know is that it says NOAA-approved weather radio. The second piece of information you want on that is Same localized alerting. What that is you can put in a code that's geographically tied to your location, and it will only alert you for events in that geographical location. And it is really good, it's really precise, and there's about over 60 ways or 60 alerts that you can receive. You probably don't need to worry about the tsunami warnings, but I would tell you, stick with most of them that they got in there. And you, like I said, you can program them by hazard. This isn't on the list, but this is right up there with a weather radio, and that's be insured, right? Our communities are learning that FEMA isn't coming in with a checkbook. The max that you can get from FEMA after a disaster is $33,000. That's up $8,000 from the previous limit of $25,000. But if you look at this averages, you know, Superstorm Sandy hurricane in 2012, max payout was $8,000. Average payout was $8,000. Can you rebuild your home on $8,000? Nope. FEMA's money isn't designed to rebuild your life. It's designed to keep you safe. Give you temporary shelter, make sure you have food, all of that stuff, right? That's what that's for. And we've seen in the past, FEMA took over flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program because it wasn't beneficial. Private insurance companies couldn't turn a profit in the business, and FEMA had to subsidize it, right? We're getting to that world in Florida because of hurricanes. We're getting to that world in California and Colorado because of wildfires. So we really need to make sure our insurance agency is our insurance industry is supported, because if we don't, we're going to find ourselves in a situation where the state becomes the insurer of last resort, right? And there was a Wall Street Journal article 2 days ago talking about homeowners are bailing on homeowners insurance in record numbers. That's bad. That is bad. I threw that chart up there just so you can get a better look at it. But it's from the Advocate. It's a little bit dated. I will admit it's a little bit dated. 2016 was when this was out, but most of this is probably still applicable. The only difference would be we would add different disasters. And this isn't the part of the conversation today, but I want to touch on it because I brought it up. How do we build more resilient industry? Well, our industry partners need to identify the potential hazards they face. They need to plan for disasters and their impacts, and they need to implement and test their plans, right? And the same for government. How do we build more resilient government? We invest in our ability to respond to man-made and natural disasters. We develop plans to ensure that our services remain operational during a disaster, and we implement and test plans. And I want to brag on our local and county elected officials in this county, because when the pandemic hit, that's what we did. We didn't run around with chickens with our head cut off. What did we do? We built capacity to respond to the disaster that we were facing. We developed plans to ensure that we were meeting the needs of our citizens. And then what? We implemented those plans. I think this is the second time I've been on TV Hamilton. Second time. The first time was in 2019 at the Fitness Center when I talk about pandemic planning, the response to a pandemic flu in 2019. And let me tell you, Ian McKenzie Thurley, great guy, he sent me a message in 2020. He goes, I'm watching that video. We didn't make it public, right? We took it down. He goes, but I'll send it to you. And so in the middle of the pandemic response, I listened to, and this wasn't just me, it was the Butler County General Health District as well, but we all talked about our plans, our coordinated plans to respond to a pandemic event. And you know what? Everything we said in that discussion, that's what we did. We had the playbook. We built the plan. We tested it. And so when we faced that challenge, what did we do? We implemented it. And we implemented it with success. I'm very proud of the support that we were able to provide. My agency was able to provide our community during COVID-19. We helped with vaccination clinics. We handed out PPE. We did over 2,000 missions during the pandemic response. That's awesome. I have a staff of 5 people, and we made that work. I'm very proud of that. And so I think I've taken up enough of your time, but I wanted to say this in conclusion. What's the conclusion? What's the so what of all of this? Okay, Jim, we believe you. We know what you're saying. We think you're generally on track with what you're talking about. How do we get better? We invest in people. We invest in community, and we invest in preparedness. That's how we solve this problem. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I greatly appreciate it.
So, Jim, thank you for talking.